Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining in and welcome to the irrigation webinar series. Today's webinar is about the new approach to water delivery rights in Victoria, the place of take approvals framework. My name's Rob O'Connor, Vic irrigation team from Echuca, Yorta country, and we have Joe Braden working in the background, Ag Vic Tatura, keeping the webinar running smoothly, we hope. This webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent out to all webinar registrants. I would like to thank the organisations involved in the Sustainable Irrigation Program for making this webinar and the series possible, namely the Victorian Catchment Management Authorities, Rural Water Authorities, and DEECA, the Department of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. Also to those other organisations and farmer groups who have helped us to promote this webinar. If you have any questions, can you please use the Zoom chat function? If you type in your question and select co-host, and that the question will come to me and I will put it to our speakers. The questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, possibly during a break in the presentation, and that will be at the discretion of the speakers. We really do value your feedback on this webinar, and if you could complete the poll, which will come up on your screen at the end of the presentation, that would be much appreciated. And we are aiming to finish at 2 o'clock. Our speakers today are Penny Clark and Alex Murray. Both Penny and Alex work with DEECA. Penny has got a big title and prefers to be called the Manager of Place of Take Approval Framework Implementation. And Alex was the Manager of Declared System Reform, but is now the Acting Senior Manager of Water Licensing Policy. So Penny and Alex and team are overseeing the Place of Take Approvals Framework. And recently, Alex and Penny actually received an award. They're award winners, and that was for their work along with other DEECA staff on the Goulburn to Murray trade review. So congratulations, Alex and Penny, and I'll hand straight over to you, Penny.
All right, thanks Rob, and thanks everyone for coming along today. We're really just keen to use this session to give you an overview of the new Place of Take Approval Framework that's coming in Victoria, and what it means for water users and where we're at in that process. So the Place of Take Approval Framework is a new approach to water delivery rights in Victoria's declared systems. And when we say water delivery rights, we're talking about rights to have water delivered. This has no impact on water shares. They won't be affected by this change at all. And Victorian declared systems, that map on the left there is showing you those systems. They're really the systems where rights to water have been unbundled from land. So in southern Victoria, that's the Werribee and Thompson McAllister systems. And in the north, it's the Murray, Goulburn, as well as the Ovens, Broken, Campaspe, Loddon and Bullarook. The framework has been introduced by changes to the Water Act, which passed Parliament in 2021 and are due to commence by the 1st of July 2024. And I've said by 1 July 2024 there, because there is also an option to proclaim that earlier, and we are likely to proclaim them in late 2023 when we've completed the consultation that we're undertaking currently. The changes have been driven by increasing delivery risks we're seeing in the Murray downstream of Barmer, but they set a consistent framework for all Victoria's declared systems where delivery risks in similar vein could emerge in the future. The two key drivers for the changes are to make sure we're properly protecting existing water users' rights to have water delivered during the rare event of a shortfall. I've got a bit of a definition of shortfall on the next page. I'm conscious it's a word that's used in a lot of forums. But the important thing to note here is even in the Murray downstream of Barmah, shortfalls are rare. So it's not a common event. And the second part is to provide flexibility for water users to actually manage their own delivery risks in systems where delivery risks are increasing. So in terms of a meaning of shortfall, we use this term here to talk about when water that is allocated, so it's sitting in people's allocation accounts and they are entitled to use that water, but it can't be delivered to them when and where they want to use it. So this change can be caused by two different reasons, either by not enough capacity in the river to get all the water down to the place where people want to use it at the same time, or by not enough time to release more water from storage and get it down to the parts of the river where people want to use water. I've got the map of the Murray River and its tributaries showing there, and I'll just talk through each of those two scenarios in relation to the Murray. So first up, the not enough time one. See over here near Albury-Wodonga, we've got the Hume Dam. It takes about 4 weeks for water to be released from Hume Dam to make its way to the South Australian border. So that means the river operators have to make decisions about releasing water from Hume Dam 4 weeks before people down here turn their pumps on. They do a pretty good job of that and have a really good understanding, but there is always a risk that they haven't released enough water and a heat wave comes on that is more intense or longer than was anticipated, and water use will need to be rationed. Otherwise, there's just not enough water to meet everyone's needs in that lower part of the river. So that's the not enough time. The other one's not enough capacity. So in the River Murray, the main constriction on the main stem is the capacity of the Barmah Milawa, which is often referred to Barmah Choke or the Narrows. That's that section of the river here upstream of Echuca and where the Goulburn River comes in. And the river channel there narrows, and it's the limiting factor on how much water can be released each day to parts of the river downstream of the Murray. There are some other ways that water can get down to this part of the reach, like the Darling River or the Murrumbidgee and Goulburn River. There's also Lake Victoria. But when those options are at capacity, all the pressure is on the Barmah Choke. And we have been observing over the last few decades a reduction in how much water can be released through Barmah, resulting in an increased risk of needing to ration the people downstream of Barmah all the way through to the Murray mouth. In a shortfall, water users will need to be temporarily rationed, and that's about sharing the pain of a shortfall between everyone with a right to take water, rather than resulting in the river running dry and people in particular parts of the river having no access at all. So that's the Murray shortfall scenario. Obviously, we're less most of the other rivers in Victoria are much smaller, much shorter and smaller than this. However, the risk could emerge in the future, and this is about setting up a framework so when this happens, it's clear how the right access to that water will be shared. On this slide here, I want to talk you through what's actually going to change for water users on commencement of place of take. And by doing that, I first took through the existing rights that water users have in unbundled systems in Victoria. So when we unbundled, water right holders received 3 different products. The first of those was the water share, which is that right to a share of water in the system. It's probably the most well-known of these rights because people are used to looking at the allocations that they receive under their water share. However, holding a water share doesn't give you any right to use or take water from the river. It's the water use licence or water use registration that gives you the right to use water. So irrigators all hold water use licences. Registrations are held by people using water for other purposes, such as domestic or stock or commercial and irrigation use. The water use licence sets some conditions on using water on land, and that includes an annual use limit, which limits how much water can be used on that land over the course of a year. That annual use limit was issued at unbundling in proportion to their water right, water share. And people have since been able to change their annual use limit, particularly going through the irrigation development guideline process of and obtaining all the approvals to make sure there's no impacts on the land through that process. Then the third right that people received was different depending on where they were located, what type of irrigator they were. So depending on whether they're an irrigation district customer or a river diverter. So I'll start with irrigation district customers. They received a delivery share, which has a value, delivery share value in megalitres per day. And the delivery share is their right to take a water from an irrigation district. The delivery share is very well known. It's one of the major fees for annual fees for irrigation district customers. But it also provides a right to a share of the water in an irrigation district during a shortfall. And I've just got an example here of if you're a delivery shareholder with a 1 megalitre a day delivery share and there was a shortfall which required rationing to 80% for 7 days, then that delivery shareholder would only be able to take 0.8 megalitres a day for that period. So that's how their delivery share works in a shortfall. Outside of a shortfall, the delivery share does not restrict their ability to take in the same way, although there are channel constrictions that, that water corporations work through with their customers in that regard. For the river diverters, they received a works licence, which is a right to take water from the river, but it's also their right to operate a pump on the river as well. And that works licence has a number of conditions on it, including one called the extraction share condition, which is also in megalitres per day. And like the delivery share, both the extraction share and delivery share, they were issued in proportion to annual use limit at unbundling. In a shortfall, extraction share is the mechanism by which river diverters are rationed. So the similar example here, if you have a 1 megalitre a day extraction share and a shortfall occurs, you can be rationed to 80%. A shortfall with 80% rationing for 7 days, you'd only be able to take 0.8 megalitres a day for that period. And like the delivery share outside of a shortfall, the extraction share does not have any impact on how much water you can take. You might be constrained here by your infrastructure around your pump size and other things. So that's what we have, everyone has currently, before the place of take approval framework has come into effect. And one of the really big drivers for the place of take approval framework is some of the issues we have with the way works licenses have been set up currently. So I mentioned there's a number of conditions on a works license. It includes things like obligations to maintain a meter and protect the local waterway and things that are really about operating a pump more than taking water. A lot of people are not familiar with their extraction share because it's hidden in amongst all these conditions and it's not something that's ever been used. Even in the Murray, where we're worrying about shortfall risks increasing, irrigators haven't been rationed since 2002, which was before unbundling happened, and these extraction shares got set up in this way. The other thing is that these works licenses are, of all these rights we've got up here, they're the only one that is fixed term. The other 3 rights are all enduring rights. So works license holders need to apply to renew their works license every 5 or 15 years, depending on the conditions on that license. Some of the challenges that created is back in 2019, when the then Victorian Minister for Water was concerned about delivery risks increasing in the Murray and was interested in putting a cap on extraction shares, there really wasn't a mechanism for that to be able to be done. So since 2019, the Ministers for Water we've had in Victoria have all been individually assessing any applications for new extraction share in Victoria for impacts on existing entitlement holders and the environment, which has effectively resulted in no new extraction share in the Lower Murray since July 2019. That's obviously been relying on individual minister decisions, and place of take approval framework will allow us to move to a more permanent and clear capping arrangement around extraction shares. So we'll move into what this actually means for water users in place of take now. So on commencement of the place of take approval framework, Each river diverter will receive a place of take approval for each place they currently have approval to take water. So that could be your service point. The place of take approval is an enduring approval, and the extraction share condition will be moved off the works licence and on to the place of take approval. That makes it the extraction share an enduring right, and it also enables caps on extraction share to be formally set into perpetuity, as well as rules for trading extraction share. So that's what the change means for river diverters. For people in irrigation districts, they are also going to receive a place of take approval for every place they currently have approval to take water. Obviously, they don't have an extraction share that will be moved across. Their delivery share will also not be moved across because it's already a capped right, effectively, because of the nature of the infrastructure and irrigation district systems. There isn't a need to move that across at this point. What that means is for irrigation district customers, place of take approval may not look like a big change because they have an existing approval to take water. The difference now is that approval and the powers in the Victorian Water Act sitting behind that will be these place of take approval powers, and they will be exactly the same for everyone, regardless of whether you're in an irrigation district or or pumping off the river, whether you've got a tagged water share or you've purchased allocation on the water market. Everyone is on the same page around their approvals to take water. And again, most people don't come into play with the compliance and enforcement provisions, but if you are non-compliant with any of your approvals to take water, everyone is on the same platform around them. So I know that's a lot of information on that slide. On this slide here, I've got my high-level summary of what this really means for water users. So in the first instance, everyone who has an existing approval to take water from a declared systems will get that formally recognised as a place of take approval on commencement of this new framework. And that means there'll be a record in the Victorian Water Register, and everyone is on the same platform around their approval powers and any compliance and enforcement provisions. For irrigation district customers, there's actually no impact on how they take water. Their delivery share will remain their right to a share of water in a shortfall. And we do acknowledge that for a lot of irrigation district customers, they may not actually know this is happening because it's not actually affecting anything that they're doing. For river diverters, it does mean a little bit more because they'll see their extraction share moved from their works licence to their place of take approvals. Even though their extraction share will remain their right to a share of water available in a shortfall, it will become an enduring right. And we can expect, at least in systems where delivery risks are increasing, like the Murray downstream of Barmah, to see caps on extraction share and trading rules be introduced. In terms of where we're at, in terms of where we're at with implementing these changes, there's been three main streams of work that the department has been working through with water corporations and agencies and irrigators over the last little while. The first of those is a nice big IT project. We have been making changes to the Victorian Water Register, so these approvals can be recorded and managed in there, and the extraction share can move off the works licence onto the approvals. These changes have been developed and tested, and they're really ready to go when we commence in space. There's also a number of rules that can be made. The first of these, and we're going to talk through a little bit of these in detail further through this presentation, but the first of these is conversion rules, which clarify how extraction share will be distributed when people have multiple approvals. The second is rationing areas, which is the areas by which people will be rationed consistently. And the third is any rules around extraction share, such as that cap and trade of extraction share that's proposed in the Lower Murray. We've also had a large program of consultation and communications, and that's included a place of take consultative committee, which has been comprised of 8 irrigators from across Victoria's declared systems, and they've been providing advice to the department on the development of these new rules and also on how we communicate and consult with affected water users on the changes. That's resulted in a large number of presentations and engagement sessions with a range of different irrigation and stakeholder groups. along the lines of the one we're doing today, or thank Vic for their popular sessions like this. It's great being able to get such a big group of people through this method. We've also got a lot of information on the Victorian Water Register website, including fact sheets. We've got some little animations or videos and frequently asked questions there as well. And we've been working closely with the water corporations to make sure they're directly communicating with affected water users about this. And that will be coming up over the next 6 months more particularly. In terms of river diverters, as I mentioned, this change means more for river diverters. So there's a couple of key bits of information that it is useful and important really for river diverters to be aware of prior to commencement. The first is to make sure you understand what your extraction share is. And you can check your extraction share by getting a copy of record for your works licence. You can do that via the Victorian Water Register website, which we have got the link there for, or through contacting your water corporation. And the little example there in the blue box is what that extraction share condition actually looks like on your works licence. So I mentioned there's about 20 or so conditions on most works licenses. It's not always condition number 4 and 5, but it's usually under that heading of rosters and restrictions. And these two sentences or these two conditions are on every works license in a declared system in Victoria. The only difference is the value of your extraction share. So this example there shows someone with a 2.1 megalitre a day extraction share. The other really important thing for to be aware of is that the extraction share will be moved from the works licence to the approval held by the landholders with a water use entity, that's a water use licence or registration, linked to the works licence. So in most cases, the person who holds the water use licence is the same person who holds the works licence, but there are scenarios where there's some differences in that circumstance, particularly where syndicates have been set up and there are multiple people operating off the same works licence. The reason for moving the extraction share to the water use entity holder is because they're the person with approval to use water and also the person who is obliged to comply with any restrictions or rationing during a shortfall. On your copy of record, you can check, on your works licence copy of record, you can check what water use entities are linked to it. So I've got that related instruments section showing there. I think it's about the bottom of the second page, if I'm getting that right. And there will be any water use licenses or registrations with their ID number showing there. Again, a lot of works licenses are only linked to one water use license, but there are some where there is multiple. And that's where these conversion rules that I mentioned earlier are important because they'll set out how the extraction share will be distributed between those multiple water use license or registration holders. Oh no, I just clicked on the link. Is that still showing for everyone?
We can see your slide, Penny.
Excellent.
Yep.
Apologies.
Yep.
Little panic of a click of the wrong thing on my end. Okay, so conversion rules, as I said, the Act itself sets out pretty clearly what happens on commencement of this new framework. The works licence, the extraction share moves from the works licence to the place to take approval. These conversion rules just provide some more clarity what happens when people have complex scenarios where there's multiple approvals currently linked to a works licence. The rules have been developed in consultation with water users and the Place to Take Consultative Committee that I mentioned earlier, and they are published on the Victorian Water Register website. They're a nice legal document for people who like reading legal documents. You can get all the details there, but there is also a fact sheet there that provides a more user-friendly summary. And this little table here is my ultra user-friendly summary to say there's really two key elements of these conversion rules. The first is based around shared works licenses. That's the scenario I was just talking about then, where there's multiple water use entities connected to the one works license. And the second scenario is where someone with a water use entity has multiple approvals on that water use entity. So this doesn't involve multiple people, but still requires distributing the extraction share between the new approvals. So for the shared works license scenario, the default arrangement will be that on commencement, extraction share will be distributed in proportion to annual use limit on the water use entity. And that's consistent with how the extraction share was issued in proportion to annual use limit back at unbundling. The exception for that is in the Murray downstream of Barmer. As I mentioned earlier, in this reach, there hasn't effectively been no new extraction share issued since July 2019. So to make sure where anyone in a shared works license situation has increased their annual use limit since then without making a commensurate increase in extraction share, the distribution will be based on the 2019 AUL in those cases. And that's just about protecting the neighbours of people who have decided to take that additional risk of increasing annual use limit without increasing extraction share. The other key part for these shared works licenses to be aware of is that while we've got this default arrangement, we know that a lot of people in shared farming situations already have existing agreements around how they share their access to that infrastructure. So there is an option here for those holders prior to commencement to nominate to their water corporation their preferred distribution, and it will be converted on commencement in the manner that they have nominated. That does require all water use entity holders signing a form and agreeing that that's their preferred distribution. In the coming weeks, the water corporations will be writing to people who are in this situation to make sure they have this information and are able to work with them to nominate a preferred distribution if they choose. And then the second scenario, so those people who have multiple approvals on their one water use entity. So the most common one for this is someone might have 2 pumps on their water use license. Their extraction share is going to be distributed in proportion to their historic use. So with a minimum value reflective of domestic and stock use. I've got a couple.
Penny, I think you've just hit the mute button.
Thanks, Rob. You got me back? Excellent. Now you're on mute, Rob, but I'm going to go. Yeah. So look, this is just a scenario of the shared works license example and what will happen on conversion for someone in that scenario. In this example here, we've got a works license with an extraction share of 1 megalitre a day, and it's currently supplying 2 water use licenses. Water use license 1 held by Sam with 60 megs of AUL, and water use license 2 held by Alex with 40 megs of AUL. On commencement on commencement of the place of take approval framework, both Sam and Alex will each receive a place of take approval, and that extraction share is going to be distributed between approval 1 and approval 2 in proportion to their annual use limit. So Sam will receive 0.6 megalitres a day and Alex will receive 0.4 megalitres per day. The next scenario here I've got is where this is just one water use licence, but there are 2 pumps supplying that water use licence. So that means there'll be a service point coming off each of these pumps with records of historic use. In this scenario, we've got, again, a 1 megalitre a day extraction share and historic use at 0.1 or approval 1 is 80 megalitres, historic use at 0.2 is 20 megalitres. So on conversion, that extraction share will be distributed as 0.8 and 0.2 megalitres per day. Last couple of things for river diverters to be aware of. On commencement of the new framework, they will receive a copy of record from the Victorian Water Register of their place of take approvals. It will include the information you can see here. Probably the most critical bits about this are the rationing area. In this example, we've got someone in the Werribee River rationing area, and the extraction share will be shown as a megalitre a day volume. That little asterisk there goes to a definition of the extraction share as I've been talking through today. For people wanting to apply for new extraction share, they can apply to their water corporation, and it will need to be in accordance with extraction share rules, which we're about to get to. Really importantly though, for river diverters, they should be aware of the risk of not holding extraction share. So if you have zero extraction share and a shortfall happens, you'll have no access to water in a shortfall. Outside of a shortfall, however, you won't be restricted at all. And on that note, it's probably time to start talking about rationing areas and extraction share. So I'm going to pass over to Alex Murray to talk from him.
Sure is. So yeah, I am going to talk, Penny mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation that part of the amendment to the Water Act means that instead of the Minister doing what the Minister has been doing for a long period of time now, I think since 2019, which is assessing those works license applications and essentially not issuing any new extraction share, we are instead able to put in place a system of cap and trade of extraction share, which means that we can have an official cap on how much extraction share is on issue, if we need to have one. And we can also set trade rules, which means even though there is a cap, users can still access extraction share through trade. I'm going to break this up in what the proposed rules and the proposed rationing areas might be based on Zone 7 and then outside Zone 7. As Penny highlighted, the place for take framework actually applies to all regulated systems across Victoria. So it isn't limited to the Lower Murray, but we know that the risks in the Lower Murray are the greatest, and we know that that's the area where we do need that cap on extraction share. So I'll start off with what's proposed for Zone 7, and then I'll move on to what we're actually proposing outside of Zone 7, because the rules will be a little bit different for how you can access extraction share during, to manage your risk of shortfall, So the very first thing is that rationing areas will be declared for the Minister by the Minister for Water in Zone 7 and for other systems as well. Why we need rationing areas. So under the new amendments to the Water Act, there needs to be a declared rationing area for the Minister to be able to actually declare a ration. And we need to set those at the right scale. So the idea is that we set them at a scale where we can manage the flexibility of bringing people in and out of rations to be able to manage the shortfall situation, but also to ensure that people aren't in a ration for longer than they need to be to manage that movement of water through the system. The second reason that we're setting rationing areas, particularly for Zone 7, is that they'll be used as those kind of trading zones for extraction shares. So the rationing areas will be used to understand where you can and can't trade your extraction share through that Zone 7 area. So in terms of, and I will go into more detail about what those proposed rationing areas are on the next slide, but I'll just move now to what we're proposing in terms of the extraction share rules themselves. So firstly, in Zone 7, we are proposing that there be a cap on extraction share. In the very first instance, so this first set of extraction share rules is for a 12-month period. So the amendment to the Water Act allows us to make this first shorter period of extraction share rules while we learn more through the implementation of what those rules might need to be for the longer term. So in the very first instance, we want to make sure that the rules are fairly simple. We also want to make sure the rules allow us to manage what we need to manage without doing anything that we can't reverse. So in the first instance, for a cap of extraction share, we are proposing that the cap simply be that no new extraction share is issued. So in that respect, that's very similar to what's been happening since 2019, where the Minister hasn't been issuing new extraction share. So that means if extraction share is cancelled, it isn't reissued through that period. It just is cancelled. There will be some really minor exceptions to that rule. We always know that there's some administrative things that happen, etc., and particularly in the conversion of these rights, we need to make sure that there's the flexibility to manage something if an extraction share is supposed to exist and doesn't. But for the most part, no new extraction share is issued. So if it's cancelled, that extraction share is gone. What that does mean, though, is we're not changing anyone's current rights. So anyone that holds extraction share now will hold the same volume extraction share after conversion. So if people are looking to access extraction share after that conversion date, they will have to enter the market and trade that extraction share. So the next thing that goes in those rules is the rules for the trade of extraction share. So for Zone 7, because there will be a cap, the only way to access new extraction share is through trade. As I've mentioned, that 12-month first set of rules, the aim is that they're simple, but the aim is also that we are not opening up a system that if we decide in a year's time from extra learnings that we shouldn't have allowed extraction share to move all the way through the system, we can't manage that situation. So in the very first instance, the proposal is only to allow extraction share trade within those rationing areas. So not between rationing areas. So that really keeps the extraction share in that similar management zone to where it is at the moment. And initially that will only be permanent trades. So maybe as the market develops over time, we might see some new products develop like we see in the water share market with things like temporary trades or some, time-bound arrangements. But the proposal at the moment is just that you have transferred the ownership of that extraction share from one person to another on a permanent base. That also means the other thing that we won't be able to do in that first instance is approve trades of extraction share during a shortfall. So again, that would be quite a complicated arrangement if we had a shortfall and your extraction share was one volume and it changed in the duration of that shortfall. That's very difficult to manage. So there won't be that ability to do in-event trading if we are in that shortfall situation. The final rule that's going to be in those extraction share trading rules is the rules on the limit of how much extraction share can be held for one piece of land. So essentially this rule is trying to stop one person or, a number of people perhaps holding more extraction share than they should ever need because it is worth something. So the idea is obviously that extraction share should be held by the people that need it. So in the event of a shortfall, they will need to take water and they need to manage their risks. It isn't so that we can create a situation where we have people holding extraction share and waiting for that value to increase. So in Zone 7, we're proposing that there is a cap on that volume of extraction share that can be held for each piece of land, and that will be, or is proposed to be, based on annual use limits with a reasonable buffer for risk management. So in Zone 7, we know that your extraction share is, a part of a pool of extraction share. So you might need to hold a number for your risk management. If you were in the case of a shortfall, you were able to take the amount that you needed. So that number is volume is not yet determined, but the proposal is that it be linked to annual use limits, which is fairly similar to current practice. No penalty will exist for users who at conversion already hold over that volume. So it's really just if people are applying for trades after conversion, we are looking at those limits and making sure people aren't applying for trades that are higher than that risk management buffer we've allowed. Benny? So this slide is showing what the proposed rationing areas are for Murray Zone 7. So that's the Murray downstream of the Barmah Choke. For the purpose of this slide, ignore the purple section, which is between the Hume Reservoir and down to the Barmah Choke. That's Zone 6. So that's the Murray Valley Zone. So we're talking about the green area down to the grey area, which is the South Australian border. So there are a couple of significant kind of points in the river that have significant hydrological significance, and those main ones are Lake Victoria and the Darling River. So downstream users of Lake Victoria there in that grey area will only really need to be rationed if we were in what's called a system shortfall. That means that there isn't enough volume water in Lake Victoria at the time to supply users downstream of Lake Victoria and into South Australia. So in the case of that kind of shortfall, we will have to ration those people downstream of Lake Victoria. You can see there's only a very small stretch of a one-day travel time there for the Victorian side. But that's the instances where we may need to ration those people. Those users will unlikely need to be in a ration for other types of shortfalls because they do have that flow from Lake Victoria. So I am working backwards here, sorry, from the 5th rationing area, but that's our bottom rationing area down there. Rationing area 4, which is that pink rationing area. So you can see there that we've got the inflow from the Darling River. So Menindee is obviously a significant resource for Victoria if we have access to it. So the Menindee lakes are either online or they're offline. So that pink rationing area represents those users that have access to the flow from Menindee and the Darling River. So they will obviously need to be rationed if in some cases where Menindee is offline, but may not need to be rationed in cases where we do have access to the Menindee lakes. So that leaves us with quite a big stretch between the Mildura Weir, or between the Barmah Choke and the Mildura Weir. And so that's obviously a significant piece of river stretch there. And we are talking travel times. I mean, once you add in the travel time from the Hume Reservoir, you're talking travel times of about 3 weeks. So that's obviously a significant stretch there. Having that as one big rationing area obviously doesn't make sense. It doesn't allow river operators to manage people in and out of a ration. Therefore, it kind of doesn't make that principle that we would have people in and out of rations as quickly as we could possibly. There may be instances where that whole stretch needs to be in the ration and out of the ration at the same time, but there may be instances where we can manage it to smaller amounts. Working with river operators, their feedback was about 3 to 4 days is about the smallest kind of travel time that they would be reliably managing to, just based on things like weather forecasts, which obviously gives us our forecast demands and how long we might be in some of those stretches of shortfall for. So you can see that those two bottom, the orange and the blue areas are about 3 days travel time. The green area, there wasn't much point in chopping that up any further, simply because there aren't many users above the Turrumbary Weir there. So there wasn't much point in making that a much smaller or cutting that in half, just because of the number of diverters we have upstream of Turrumbary is really limited. What that does create is a very nice, we didn't set out to do this, but a very nice border between Lower Murray Water and Goulburn Murray Water customers, which means we have no rationing areas where we are managing a number of different water corporation customers at the same time. The other thing is that in these, you can see here that we haven't got the all the irrigation areas clearly in the colours. So the irrigation areas themselves are not in a rationing area, because in the irrigation areas, we are managing shortfalls and rations with delivery share and not with that extraction share. However, obviously the offtakes for those irrigation areas will be from one of these rationing areas, which will indicate to river operators and water corporations if there needs to be a ration passed down to the water users in the districts. Benny. So that leaves the proposal for what's happening outside Zone 7. So obviously, the risks in Zone 7 and downstream, the Murray downstream of the Barmah Choke, are quite different to the rest of the system. The reason that is because we really are managing different risks. So we're talking about smaller systems here with a smaller risk of those delivery and system shortfalls, and obviously shorter travel times as well, which will obviously impact what we need to do in some of those instances, like rationing areas, for instance. But as Penny said, the place of take framework actually is applied to the whole of Victoria. And we have the opportunity, obviously, to make sure that we're managing the risks in those systems as well, and hopefully stopping them from eventuating to the same level that we're seeing in that Lower Murray region. So we are proposing to set rationing areas outside of Zone 7 as well. The difference between those rationing areas is that they won't be used as trading zones for extraction share rules, because there won't be a cap and trade system in those systems outside of Zone 7. So the rationing areas will still be set. They'll be declared. There's always a risk that something could happen and users might need to be rationed. So the opportunity is there to declare them now. So that's just makes it simple for the future if something were to happen. But also it makes it really clear when users aren't in a ration. So if there is a ration declared and it has a rationing area on it, it just makes it really clear for people that it does or does not apply to them. As I mentioned, and I'll show in a moment what we're proposing in terms of rationing areas in the other systems. But I'll just talk now quickly to what the extraction share rules are being proposed for the other systems. So at the moment, we're not proposing to place a cap on extraction share in other systems. So at the moment, Zone 7 is the only area where we're managing to that level of risk where we think there needs to be a cap of having any new extraction share in the system. We don't think we're at that stage to be managing that level of risk in the other systems. In saying that, we do know that there is still a risk that obviously if extraction shares are the importance of extraction share and managing your risk through through any kind of ration is highlighted, that could mean that there is that opportunity or that driver for people to go and get more extraction share in case there was a cap to be put on in the future. So we don't want to be creating a system where we are getting into these risky areas because of the rules that have been put in place. So we are proposing to still have that limit on how much extraction share can be held for any one piece of land in those systems outside of Zone 7 as well. In those systems, you will still be going to the water corporations to have your extraction share issued. So you won't need to access extraction share through trade, but you'll be able to go and get that extraction share from your water corporation. But there will be that limit on how much you can ask for. So there is currently a business rule for how the different water corporations issue extraction share. So the proposal is to make that cap on the extraction share for that individual land to be in line with what those business rules are for the water corporations. So essentially that's just in line with current practice. And that means that we're not having lots and lots of extraction share being issued in these other systems, which is actually eroding the rights of other people. Remembering that extraction share is a share of the available water. So the more that is issued, the more it erodes the rights of the people that already hold it. So we are managing a slightly different risk with those individual land limits in the other systems, but we're still managing that risk of in lieu of having that overall cap, we are capping how much an individual will be able to hold on land. Just like in Zone 7 though, if people have over that limit now, they won't be penalised after conversion. It really is for when people are going to have more extraction share issued, that those limits will be put in place. Benny? I won't spend too much time on this because you can see it has a lot in these tables. But essentially, as I mentioned, we are proposing that these rationing areas exist for these systems outside of Zone 7. These rationing areas are the proposed rationing areas are very in line with essentially what our delivery systems are in the Victorian Water Register. So this is at the moment how we manage each of these systems, or to what level we manage each of these systems when you're looking at deliveries and rights on issue and things like that. So we're proposing that the rationing areas essentially be in line with how the systems are managed at the moment, or to the level the systems are managed to at the moment. Just like in Zone 7, the irrigation districts themselves will not be in a rationing area, but similar, if the offtake rationing area was to be rationed, that's when water corporations would know that an irrigation area might need to be rationed as well. So as you can see, it does cut up or does break down a lot of the rationing, the systems to a few rationing areas, but essentially it will be aligned with the delivery system that is already in the water register for each river diverter. I think that's it, Penny. Should we? So just finishing up on where people can find more information. So we've got a lot of information about the place of take framework on the Victorian Water Register. So there is a general page on the Victorian Water Register about the place of take approvals. We've got some great resources. We've got fact sheets and FAQs. And we've got those animations that Penny was talking about. So those animations are fantastic. They're about 90 seconds. And there's an animation for a few different scenarios. So for district customers, for private diverters, depending on how many pumps they might have. And they really set out what your rights are going to be, or what the changes to the place of take framework mean for you, and also what some of those conversion rules will be for you if you have situations where you do have multiple pumps or you're sharing pumps, for instance. I'm not sure if everyone else can see the, I actually can't see the, well, it's been cut off the bottom there, but there's also a couple of really good places on the Victorian Water Register and on the Murray-Darling Basin Authority website if you're looking for more general information about Lower Murray delivery risks. So there's quite a lot of information in both those places, which, yep, obviously they're very linked subjects, and people often are looking for that information about delivery risks. I think that's it from us, Rob. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Penny. We do have a lot of questions, and yes, we could see the bottom of that slide too, Alex. Yeah, there's a question here from Scott. If the extraction share is to be moved from the works licenses to place a take for river diverters, why not move the extraction share for irrigation districts as well? And a bit of a concern there being, how will people be sure where to look for extraction share if it's located in different locations?
I can probably answer that one. So where am I going to go? So for river diverters, obviously, I'm not answering this well, am I? There's lots of questions in that one. Let me start with why we're not moving extraction share or moving delivery share for irrigation district customers to their place of take. There is actually an option for us to do this in the future. The way the Act is set up, it's something we could do. It's something that we have chosen not to do at commencement because we think there's actually a lot of consultation and considerations that need to be worked through with enabling delivery share to be treated in the same way as extraction share and allowing those irrigation district customers to sell their or trade their delivery share out of those districts. Currently, they can trade within the district based on the delivery share. So, look, it is something that's an option for the future. I think for district customers, they're very familiar with their delivery share because of the fees that are associated, their annual fees that are associated with access to the irrigation district are based around their delivery share. Also in systems that some irrigation districts do have congestion challenges outside of the river shortfall scenarios we've been talking through today, and they're used to being rationed in proportion to their delivery share. So making the extraction share available for river diverters on their place of take approval is really about bringing them up to the same level of visibility as the district customers currently have, or at least closer to that. Hope that answers it.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Penny. I've got one here from Julia, and it might take a bit of creativity, but if you were starting from scratch, designing a system from scratch, would you do it differently?
That is a big question.
Yeah.
If you were designing a whole water entitlement framework from scratch, I think there'd be a lot of things you'd do differently. Certainly in terms of delivery rights, there are different ways you could set this up. What we've done here with Place of Take is trying not to make radical differences on where we started from. So the extraction share was envisaged to be used this way as part of back at unbundling time. So minimising changes is obviously a good thing. I think if you were starting from scratch, I almost can't fathom it, because it's so hard to do in the whole picture is part of it, and it is about keeping everything matching together. Flexibility is wonderful, but then complexity comes along with that sometimes too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can ever, I think policy should never be set and forget, right? So there's always going to be changes. I mean, as Penny said, you build in as much flexibility as you can, but there's always going to be things that come up that you're never going to know. So yes, you'd probably do things differently, but that's with the knowledge of what the system looks like now versus when you designed the entitlement framework. So I think, I think that's probably the same with every policy that's existed, that we actually should be going back and making sure that they're still fit for purpose and making changes based on the new world.
Great. Yep. A question here: how will you enforce people to ration during a shortfall?
The big one, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So there are new powers introduced to the Act to help support enforcement and compliance with rationing. A big part of what we're doing at the moment is making sure we have the education and understanding piece, so people understand that if they're non-compliant in a ration, there are impacts on other rights holders. During a ration, there are different, I guess, technical mechanisms for monitoring it depending on different systems. So in Lower Murray Waters area, there is telemetry for all their private diverters, where they'll be monitoring in effectively real time how much people are taking compared to what they're able to take. For all the irrigation district customers, ordering is in ordering systems help manage that, as well as the telemetry and monitoring of what people are taking in practice. And similarly, in GMW's private diverter region, there is a program to make sure that more frequent, there'll be high risk people and more frequently getting out and checking people's meters during a shortfall. Post a shortfall event, the enforcement provisions have been increased through these through the changes to the Water Act. There is now obligations on directors of companies, and they become liable, which can include imprisonment and fines.
Yep.
And I think it's important to note as well, compliance is a challenge outside of a shortfall as well, and it's something that will continue to the approach will continue to be worked up over time, just with normal compliance.
Yep, and certainly some measures there to deal with it. I'm just a bit wary of the time. There's two key questions here. Will there be any new fees associated with the Place of Take approvals?
That's a nice, easy one. No, there aren't. So they're existing approvals, so there's nothing new coming out to do with this.
Yep. And lastly, how do people get feedback to you about the Place of Take approvals framework?
Oh, that's a trickier question, which it really shouldn't be, should it? Look, if anyone has my contact details, I'm happy to answer questions.
Otherwise, there is actually a Water Markets email as well, which is fairly easy to get us onto, which is water.markets@DELWP, so still DELWP.vic.gov.au. So there's always that mechanism to contact us.
Thanks, Alex. Probably better because I'm about to go on leave for 2 weeks, so you won't hear from
Yes,
me.
you won't hear from Penny.
Okay, I'm going to pull it up there. It is past 2 o'clock, but thanks Penny and Alex for great presentation, and thanks for explaining it so clearly. Yeah, done a good job there. Thanks also to Joe for keeping things going pretty smoothly through the webinar, and most of all thanks to the webinar participants for your support and your contributions through the webinar. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.